Welcome everybody. Thank you, Howard, for joining. This is our second mastery session. And following on from last week's, which was a bit more of a kind of personal vibe around values and clarity and alignment, we're sidestepping into the business side of things now, but looking, I guess, at a similar angle. So how to find the value in your business, what that means, and what you can do to use that to help you to stay aligned, to move forward, and to build success. Howard is, as a quick introduction, and I will ask him for a much better one from his point of view, but from my point of view, I met Howard, I don't know now, probably 3 years ago or something?
3-4 years ago, yeah, it would have been, wouldn't it?
Yeah. We went through an accelerator called the Workplace Accelerator with Diversely. And within that accelerator, we had to pick, I think, 5 or 6 mentors to help us on specific things. And Howard was one of those mentors, specifically on my side of the business, so on the commercial side. And I can honestly say that Howard's sessions and the work that we did with him over that 6 months or so completely changed the way that I looked at how to put my business proposition across, how to sell what I was selling, and how to get much better conversion. And slight spoiler alert, but that comes down to value. So Howard is here with us today. Howard, I'm going to let you just do a little intro first before we kick off. I'd love to hear just about your entrepreneurial journey and what's kind of led you to this point today.
That's a very long journey, longer than most of you on this call, I can tell you that. So I started in probably one of the most unentrepreneurial businesses you can ever imagine, which is the British Army. And I spent about 5 or 6 years, Germany and Ireland. And I decided the late 80s, that was it. I was going to go into business. I've had enough of running around in uniform, which was great fun, but hey, I had other priorities. So I left, and having done an MBA, I then worked for 2 American companies. One was Eli Lilly, pharmaceutical company, in the news at the moment, making a lot of money for various drug discoveries. At that time, they were making Prozac, interestingly enough. So that was exciting for some of us anyway. And then in the mid-90s, I flipped over from buying software, because I was actually in an IT role, running IT teams, buying software, implementing software, to selling it. And I joined a company called CSC, which is now DXC, and ended up being head of commercial sales in the UK. Got to 2002, having traveled around a bit, and I said, I'm never ever going to work for a big American company ever again. I'm sure there's a few other people that would have that same sentiment. And I thought to myself, why don't I use the skills that I have gathered working in these 2 very prestigious organizations, helping other smaller companies grow? So that's when I started consulting. And I'm based in South Manchester in Cheshire. And there are a lot of highly entrepreneurial people here in a number of sectors, one of those sectors being recruitment, and another of those sectors being software. So spent a few years doing that, just generally helping small businesses of whatever type. But then I got into the recruitment game, helping companies, recruitment agencies who wanted to convert into being recruitment outsourcing companies. Helen will know what I mean here, because I mean we've sold it, we're selling into them, sold into this industry. Actually ended up being managing director of one of the UK's leading recruitment outsourcing companies for about 7 years, until about 2014. And then when I left in 2014, I thought, I'm going to go back to my roots, and I'm going to help companies develop their businesses again. So that's what I've been doing, but naturally then fell into this focus on HR tech, learning tech, recruitment technology.
Yeah. And why, what was the draw, I suppose, towards sales and growth and that side of it? What do you think your background set you up for, ideally, to help people with that? Because you do, I'm going to hand over the reins to you in a few minutes for you to explain more about this, but you do have, I would say, quite a different perspective on that.
And I think that's a that's a perspective that's probably changed over the years. And I think when I started really seriously looking at sales was probably in the late 90s, selling software into very competitive environments. And it sort of almost, and you do all the normal things, to do that, talk to as many people as possible, tell them how fantastic the software was that you were either developing or implementing or managing or whatever it might be. And then after a few years, I realized actually that it's the psychology of sales, which is the important thing to really understand, rather than the process of sales. And that just really interested me. And I think it interested me one because I'm not necessarily interested in psychology, but I'm interested in what drives people to make decisions. I think that's interesting. And also a lot of it is actually counterintuitive to what people might have strategies that they think are obvious, but actually when you think about it, they can hamper sales rather than improve sales. So what I was finding was that I was doing things that perhaps a normal salesperson would not be doing and not be thinking of as being the obvious things. For instance, put your price up. Not an obvious strategy, but if you do it in the right way, it could generate more sales. So that intrigued me. And I think the ability, as I said, I think grew in confidence and knowledge and ability myself. I think that's when I thought, this is something I quite enjoy transferring into other people's businesses and get the satisfaction to see them benefit from what I spent years in getting wrong to start with, and then hopefully getting some of it right anyway.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a very clear payoff there, isn't there? It's not kind of fuzzy around the edges. It either increases your revenue or it doesn't really.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
and in terms of the types of challenges that you would classically see, and I presume there's probably a bit of a pattern here, founders facing when they come to you, what are the things that are frustrating them? What walls are they hitting? Is there a kind of typical, I mean, whether it's kind of HR tech or recruitment, or I suppose any other founder, is there something that you
Yeah.
typically see people struggling with?
I think typically what I find is you've got a founder who's probably, I mean, you might be a startup, but you're not going to get too frustrated when you're starting up. I mean, it's a startup and you're expecting things to take a little bit of time. Okay, but give it a few years and suddenly we're all very impatient and we get frustrated by the fact that we're not getting the results that we think we should get. Because let's be honest, what we've created is better than anything anybody else could have created. And why aren't people buying it? And why aren't people choosing to go with either the service or the product that I'm offering? I've made it as good as I can, and I'm offering it for a fantastic price. And when I talk to people, they're all very positive, but in the end, they're not signing up. And that is by far the most common frustration that the founders we talk to have. And the reason for that could be, I mean, many fold, but that classically is the environment that we're walking into, myself and my team are walking into, when you've got a friend there.
I'm having a certificate waved through the door. Something
Fantastic.
monumental has happened today. I will
You
have to
must
go and
have,
check out what it is after this call, though.
don't worry, you must have achieved something very good. Anyway, so
Oh,
yeah, it's that I would say is the most common frustration that we have. And if I look almost at all the people we work with, that's where they're starting from. We've got this
yeah.
fantastic product or service. We're trying desperately to sell it to people who are all very positive, but in the end, they're not prepared to sign 5 copies of the contract,
It's quite
and move on.
scary, isn't it? How common that is, and how, I mean, would you say that that is a challenge for pretty much every founder at some point? I don't know many who could honestly sit there and say, no, we just went from there to there, and it was, there was none of this along the way. Have you seen anybody completely sidestep that problem?
I think you do get them. You do get the odd one. But to be fair, they're probably not the sort of people that are knocking on our door either.
Yeah.
But you have got some that are able to do that. I would say they are quite often they've founded companies before, So they know what
Right.
they're
Yeah.
doing, and they're very clear then about the proposition. Also, the other thing that they probably have is a group of investors that are prepared to back them through those ups and downs. Interestingly enough, we get approached by a lot of bootstrapped companies, actually, not necessarily those that have wanted or
Yeah.
required investment either. So they probably haven't benefited from, let's say, any external investor coaching that you can get if you've been through the investor route. But it's incredible. I mean, it's incredible how naive in a way we can all be. And I put myself in this bucket as well when I've been involved in setting up businesses. And actually sometimes it just does take somebody else to come in and look at it and go, guys, really, why are you doing this? Or why are you not doing this? Yeah. So
Because we all think we're doing, as you say, we all think we're doing everything right. If you're hitting
yes.
scale,
Yeah.
if you're going to the events, if you're putting out your marketing materials, if you're talking about your product or your service or whatever, you think you are the reasonable choice from a price perspective. Could you just give us like a couple of those? You mentioned the counterintuitive point. What if those are perhaps you don't need to be focusing on you're sort of thinking about in the wrong or the opposite way?
Okay. So I would say, and I'm probably skipping into some of what I could talk
Yeah.
about where we get to a bit, but I think you've asked the question, so let me answer it. I say there are three things which founders do, which intuitively sound right, but actually are probably almost invariably the wrong way to go. The first is, let's build as much as I can into my product or service offering. Let's put absolutely everything into it, because the buyer community that I'm focusing on are going to be looking for everything. And the more I've got, and by the way, also, that means that they can't turn around and say, well, you don't do this, and that's a reason for them not buying it. So
Mm.
that's the first strategy that we hear a lot of. The second one is, not only are we going to build everything, we're also going to sell to as many people as we can. So anybody that in any way could at all use our software, not even just benefit, but use our software or our service, we're going to sell to. And that's brilliant, because we've now got a fantastically capable bit of software and we're selling it to almost everybody in the world, frankly. And then what's the third thing we can do? Well, tell you what we're going to do is we're going to drop our price as well, because by dropping our price, more people are going to want to buy it, and we'll make up any lost revenue with the volume. So even if I drop
Mm.
my price by half, we're going to double sales. And by the way, because we've got
Mm.
absolutely everything in our software, and by the way, because we're absolutely selling to everybody, it's a winning formula. Well, I mean, you probably also say, yeah, well, it's not a winning formula, actually, because you spend all your time chasing after functionality on your software. You put loads and loads of stuff into it, which actually people don't want, and you spend a lot of money on it, and it just defocuses the proposition that you're going to market with, the thing that you
Yeah.
are actually there to deliver. You're then selling to a lot of people for which this is probably not really what they're looking for. Yes, they can use it. Of course they can. They probably think it's quite an interesting service or something. They've probably never seen it before. What a good idea. But it's not what they really truly need. It's not a must have. And by dropping the price, actually, when you've done those first two things, you've lost the pull from the buyer anyway. So you could give it to them for free and they probably wouldn't take it, because it's not
Yeah.
what they want. And all it means is actually you've got to sell even harder to generate the revenue that you could have done. I mean, we've got a client at the moment, and I was listening to a demo of theirs a few days ago, a sales demo that they recorded, and they had you could sign up for a year's subscription, but you could cancel at any time during that year's subscription. And the salesperson was actively selling that ability to be able to cancel, even though the prospect was turning around and saying, I just want to know what the annual subscription is. But that's the great thing. You don't worry about that. You can cancel after a month. You go, well, why are you encouraging people? you're there in the game of delivering value for as long a period as possible and generating some commercial return for yourself as well. So it's, you know, those are three counterintuitive strategies that we see a lot of. When we explain to people, say, this isn't the right way to do it, I think people get it. Then deploying that is a challenge, really getting the rest of the business to understand that.
Yeah, it's easier said than done, that's for sure, because
Definitely.
as you say, it is counterintuitive, but it also requires an awful lot more hard work and research and testing, and conversation, to narrow that down. Because if you
Yes.
narrow that down and then you don't get it right, you're also not going to have any success. But having that kind of very broad stroke, broad picture of sell to all these people, some people will like it, it's not going to be that expensive, so it doesn't matter if half of them don't use it or whatever, is exhausting, because not only are you having to increase the scale at which you're selling it to and probably increase the amount of money you're spending on getting to all those people, but also and we had this problem with diversity, when it does get into their system or they have bought it, they don't use it because it's not valuable to them, and it kind of just sits on a shelf getting dusty. And then unfortunately, if you do have investors or if you do have people who are tracking this sort of stuff, as you should be, it looks pretty shit, because it looks like you have a product that nobody likes, whereas actually it's hugely valuable to just a smaller section of people.
Yeah, I mean, if you sell, let's take software as an example, but services, recurring services, subscriptions are the same. It's better to have somebody, better to sell to one person that's going to use your software for 5 years than it is 4 people that are only going to use it for a year each. Because you might get the revenue up front or through that 4 years for each of those one that you sell, but then at the end of that you've got to resell, and there's no retention. And retention, if you want to build value in your business, retention is one of the big indicators for a potential purchaser of value. So I always say, don't if you're going to lose business on the fact that you're asking people to sign up for a year or 2 years or 3 years, so be it. Actually, what it forces you to do as a business is to think about how you deliver value over that period of time. And for transactionally based businesses, that's a real challenge if you want to go to a subscription model. But that's a really value adding thing to be able to do, is to convert your proposition from being a transactional one to being more of a long-term management proposition.
Yeah, and when you're talking about the tech space or building something of value, that's a huge measure in that space, is the churn and the retention and all the rest of it, and as you say, the amount of money that it takes to then get those people back. I guess just a final question from me before I sort of hand the floor over. What advice would you give someone who is at the beginning of their journey when it comes to getting better conversion? Is there kind of a one specific thing that you think would unlock a few more doors, let's say?
I think, and I'm going to talk about this in a moment, but I think it's being really clear about what you are offering, why, and to who. And I think if you can get alignment between those 3 things early on, and bearing in mind to an extent what you're doing as a founder, you're testing things as well. If you hit it right first time, you're really, really lucky. But I think if you can explicitly go into the journey understanding what those 3 things are. So what are you offering? Why are you offering it, and to who? And just understand what the relationship of those 3 things are, and work out how you might need to adapt 1 or 2 or all 3 of those things into a situation where you're getting pull and traction from the market, because that's what you want. You want some pull from the people that you're talking to, say, actually, what you're offering is really, really useful for us, and I'm going to I'll give it a go. I think the danger can be you go broad, like I've just described. The days you can be tunnel focused and not be prepared to admit that perhaps our original idea wasn't the right one. I know you went through this, Helen. You know, our idea wasn't right. I've been through it loads of times. You know, well, yeah, that probably doesn't hit it. And also really understanding how that then matches with the people that you're talking to and what their own internal thought processes and buying processes are.
Yeah.
And the sooner that you can work that out and determine it, I think the sooner you find that the process of getting sales will become less of a chore and more actually of I'm not saying it's ever going to be an automatic pilot, but you're going to understand how you're going to make sales rather than
Yeah.
whether you can make sales.
Yeah, and it's so apt to talk about this because it's exactly what we're exploring in our first module, which is clarity. And I've given the guys some different ways of looking at that, some different formulas to try and build that in. And it is just being a bit unafraid and having the courage to build things and break things, build things and break things,
Yeah,
and keep just switching that path, keep just tweaking, as you go along. Because you're right, you never get it right, or very rarely get it right the first time. It takes a lot of failing actually, in order to
that's
improve.
and self sort of actualization. And I think even companies that have scaled, I mean, the companies that we've worked with that have grown and then suddenly their sales have just gone down and down and down and down. Now they can blame some of that on the market, and I sort of get that. But you've got to also think, well, have we actually changed what we were doing? And
Yeah.
some of the changes might have caused the problems. Some of the fact that they haven't changed might have caused the problems as well. So this isn't just it's not just for founders. I think this is apposite for people that are 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years into their journey. It's change. You've always got to consider this sort of the three-legged stool of the offering, the why, and also the people that you're selling to.
Yeah. Thank you, Howard. It's been a really nice refresher for me as well to hear your always extremely logical, sensible approaches and voice on the end of this call. So thank you. And as I said, Howard provided such an enormous kind of shift in the way that we approach things and just our perspective and our mindset with diversity. So I'm going to hand over the floor to you, Howard. I'm not sure if you're able to share your screen. I have made you co-host, but there's two of you on this call, so it might
Yes, there
be
are. So I'm
you.
hoping I should be able to share it.
There we go.
There you are. Are we in?
I can't see your screen yet. Oh, yeah, there we go. Perfect. All right.
There we go.
Over to you.
Thank you. And right, I'm just going to share my screen. So, and by the way, Helen, thanks very much for letting me wax lyrical about value. And by the way, I can't see any of you at the moment. I don't think I might be able to on the other screen. But if anybody wants to chip in or ask questions, feel free. I'm happy to take questions now. So I was going to talk about value, and rather I think in terms of I listened to one of the previous sessions around sort of internal value. This is more around value delivery or value sort of exposition into your customer base and into the market. And I was just going to go over some of the thoughts that I have around how you can build value or build the belief of value, in particular from your prospects and your customers in what you are creating and what you are delivering. So it's a bit of a brain dump. We've only got a few minutes, and normally, as Helen knows, these types of discussions can be quite a few sessions, not just one. What I wanted to let me just start with a few statements really and questions just to make us all think. And the first thing I was going to say is that we are founders ultimately because we want to help people. We're founders. We found something that we want to do in order to be able to help other people do something. Yes, of course there's a commercial imperative to that. But actually those founders that don't have some of this, which is that we want to help, aren't going to be very successful. But we are in business to help people. What that means, though, is that sometimes, and this is going back to the conversation that we had, Helen, is that there's a temptation as founders that we want to do everything for everyone. And I think one of the things that I've learned is that doesn't work. We have to be cognizant of our own ability only to do certain things, and do certain things very well, and other things that I don't do very well at all. So I think one of the things that I would say about being a founder is, don't try and do everything, and don't try and give away what you're doing. And instead try and build clarity and focus into what it is you're trying to achieve, both personally for your business and also for your clients. So the things that I've always felt are really sort of important are to think about, just because we can develop or offer everything, it doesn't mean that we should do that. We as founders need to understand where we need to stop, where we need to draw the boundary of what it is that we're going to be delivering into our prospect base. Otherwise, we're just going to try and do far too much, and whatever we deliver, we're probably not going to do it particularly well. The other thing is that just because we can sell it doesn't mean that we should. And what I mean by that is, how many times have we sat down in front of somebody and we've been talking about what we do in terms of our product or service, and they turn around and said, well, if you guys could do this, now I'd be interested. And that to me is an absolute complete warning sign. Okay, but that's not what we do, because we do this and you want this. And that just tells me they're probably not going to be my client, unless I can convince them actually that they do have the problem that I can solve. They're not my client. So again, going back to clarity and focus, this isn't about trying to sell to anyone. This is about trying to sell and deliver your product or service to the people that are going to get it, and they're going to get the benefit that you're able to deliver. So if I go back to your point, Helen, about it's really frustrating when you sell somebody something and then they don't use it, that probably means they don't understand what it is that they've been sold, and they don't have the problem that you think they have. Okay, so they're buying something for the wrong reason. So really understanding your offer and really understanding what that gives to the people that you're selling to is important, and that means focus. So the type of things that I always ask our clients to think about is, and this might be even founders that have been going for years and years and years, but not necessarily startups. All of us should be re-examining, I think, regularly, why am I in business? Why am I doing what I'm doing? What is it I'm trying to achieve? And that could be quite basic. It doesn't have to be particularly sophisticated, but at least it gives you a baseline, an anchor, from which everything you do is sort of attached. And secondly, how are you going to make a difference, and to who? What is this balance between what you're offering and who are you offering it to? And again, you're scoping it out. You're scoping out the types of people that you want to talk to, because you know that by those types of people are going to have issues or problems for which you're going to be able to support and help and make a difference. And ultimately, this is really around, and I know you mentioned this quite a lot, Helen, is what is the problem that you solve? Now, sounds like a really easy question to answer. Certainly an easy question to ask, but it is incredibly important and difficult question sometimes to answer, and actually has layers of sophistication and complexity that need to be thought about very carefully. Typically, the answer that we get when we ask our clients is, what's the problem you solve? Is, well, our product does X, Y, and Z. That is not an answer to the question. That's an answer to how are we going to answer your problem? How are we going to solve your problem? It doesn't actually articulate what the problem is. The other answer we sometimes get is, well, we solve problems for companies of between 500 and 1,000 employees in financial services based in London. Well, again, that's not the problem that you solve. When we talk about the problem we solve, we're really trying to get into the heads of the organizations and the buyers that are going to benefit best from our product or service. So it's building the narratives, it's understanding the scenarios that these organizations and the people, the buyers preferably, sometimes the users within these organizations are going through. Is it a merger? Is it they've, I don't know, been wrapped across the knuckles by, a regulatory authority? Is it that the shareholders are getting a little bit squishy because growth isn't as high as it should be? Is it that a senior manager is coming down on a functional team leader about a certain aspect of performance, and as functional team leaders, this is a personal problem for them that they need to solve, and they're looking for a solution to that? So again, there's various levels, but you are trying to uncover the uncomfortable truths within organizations and within the people within those organizations. It's the compelling events that are happening or going to happen that are going to drive people to make a decision to buy a product or service. And going back to diversity, Helen, when we were chatting that, I remember, it was always the issue that when you talk to somebody, they'd say they'd love the software, but it was a nice to have. It wasn't a must have. And what we're trying to do by understanding the problem and matching that to the people in the business and the business itself is which of these combination of people and organization is this software or service going to be a must-have? What's driving them to make the decision to do something, hopefully in the direction of what it is you're offering? And the way that we do that personally, when I talked earlier, I talked about three legs to the stool, which was positioning, the product offering, the persona, which are those three on the middle there. But actually, if I look at how we define the sort of value, what we call the value proposition framework for a company, yes, we're looking at the proposition, we're looking at the product, we're looking at the persona, but we're also looking at two other things, which is how you as an organization want to position yourself and your offering within the market. And when I say the market, I mean within the buyer community, within the user community, within partners, maybe also investors or acquirers of your business. And on the bottom there, we've got pricing, which, if I bring it up a level, is really the commercial offering that you've got. And the commercial offering is important because it can drive things like perceived accountability for your service. And what I mean by that is, if I'm a recruitment agency and I'm selling my service and getting paid on successful hires, I'm taking accountability for making sure that these hires are, that the candidates I'm presenting to a company are successful. That's different from a SaaS software product, which is selling a subscription. All I'm responsible therefore is providing the capability of that software to people. I'm not responsible for how they use that software then. So the commercial offering side of it is an important component of the value proposition. But by far the most important are the top one, which is proposition. What's the problem you solve? Persona on the right, which is who are the people and what are the types of organizations and what's the case studies, scenarios and narratives that they're going through. And in the middle, your product offering, which in itself can be quite challenging to articulate. If I take, if I take the Founder Sanctuary, you've got lots of different elements in it. How do you articulate that? How do you position that? How do you communicate that in an easy and simple way to your potential prospects and buyers? And now, a lot of us will be offering things that are actually quite complicated, and our ability to be able to communicate that simply and quickly is really important. So, and I'm just taking you through some of our thought process that we go through when we talk to clients, and hopefully this will help you. But of course, what you're really trying to think about as you're putting the propositional framework together is why should your customers care about using you? What is it that's going to drive them to do that, rather than just turning around and going, Actually, I don't really need it. And that, of course, is your biggest competitor. Your biggest competitor is do nothing. Um, and and this is linked as well to the positioning part and the propositional framework. How do you want your customers to perceive you? So supposing I know what it is I'm offering, I know who I want to be talking to here, who I think have got the problem that I can solve better than anyone else. But how do I want to be compared to everybody else in the market? Because that also is an important point. When we go out and buy a car, we don't just buy four wheels, an engine, and the ability to steer and accelerate, decelerate. We're looking at the brand and how we think if these cars compares to others, and what mean the car looks like positioned to others, and what does that mean we look like positioned to others. So positioning yourselves within the market, within the minds of your customers and partners is really important. So here's a couple of things to think about. The first is you need to think about, as you're selling your product, what are the types of buyers that you're selling to in the context of their ability or positiveness to adopt what you're selling. And what I mean by that is, if you are selling a product which is new and nobody's ever heard of before, the people that are most likely to buy that product are going to be on the left-hand side of this graph, the innovators, the early adopters. You're not going to get the laggards and the late majority buyers there. It's going to be the people that are always looking for something new, the people that always get the newest version of an iPhone or whatever, the people that want to try out the newest app, the people that are prepared to try things and give things a go because they're interested in staying ahead of the mark. And whether that's a business or a consumer, you've got those people with those characteristics. There's a particular way to sell and communicate to those people. And there's also a particular way, by the way, to price to those people. They're normally quite price insensitive. You can normally put a premium on your product there. But if you're selling a service which is actually already being sold by other people and is quite competitive, and whether a lot of other, a lot of people have whatever it is you're selling already, you're probably going to be selling to people in the early or late majority, and they're going to be far more price sensitive. They're going to be far more risk averse. They're going to be looking for comparing what you're doing to what your competition are doing. So there's a far more competitive analysis associated with the buying process there. So I'd say that one of the interesting things for you to think about as you launch your product and take it to market is, where are your customers on this life cycle, and adapt your sales and your pricing strategies and your marketing strategies to where they are on the product adoption life cycle. The second model, which I find really, really useful, and we use this with almost all of our clients, is value disciplines. I didn't invent either of these, by the way. I wish I had the adoption model and the adoption maturity, and also the value discipline. But what this is really asking you to do is to think about your business and identify how you want it to be perceived in the market in the context of these three dimensions. So if I start at the top with product leadership, do you want to be seen as having the best product, the most functional product, the most innovative product? We do things that other people don't do, product or service. And we can differentiate ourselves because we're the only people that do that. So if I go clockwise then, and we look at customer intimacy, or we don't have the best product, but what we are best at doing is our interaction with our clients, and we give them the best service. And whatever our customers want, we know that we're going to be able to do a better job of satisfying their requirements and their issues than any of our clients. Okay. And then if I go around again to operational competence and operational excellence, this is about best total cost. So we don't have the best product, and frankly, we don't have the best service either. But what we are is the cheapest. And if you want, the cheap and cheerful, or the basic option that gives you the minimum of what you need, just about what you need, but at the lowest cost, we're the people to come to. And I think as you're going on your journey at the beginning, you sort of got to work out where you where you want to sit here. Now, there's a minimum threshold for all of these. I mean, your product needs to get to a certain level of capability. You need to have a reasonable standard of customer service, and it obviously can't be overly expensive. But which one of these is prime? Because it's very, very difficult. In fact, it's almost impossible to be any more than one of these. And what it also does is it sets the tone internally within your business. If you're a product leader, a lot of the resource and the focus within your business is going to be around making sure that what you're offering is better than anyone else. And the same on customer service. If you want to be customer intimate, and if you're operationally excellent, you're going to be really looking at your own cost structure and trying to make sure that's low as possible, so that you can go in with the lowest possible price. So if I was going to recommend you do anything at the end of this, forget about what I said completely. I mean, if you wanted to remember anything, remember this, because and have a think about where you think you should be on this. And then I expect we're running out of time, but just a little bit about pricing. I think there's always big questions, and we did a lot on this, I think, Helen, didn't we, on why and for how much should they be buying your product service. So what is the sort of value level for your product, and where should you be pitching it? Because when we talk about pricing, our preference when we talk about pricing is that that's set against value, not against cost. So if you look at this graph, sorry, it's a bit complicated, but I'll try and explain it. On the bottom, we've got your price going from left to right. Left is low price, right is high price. And on the left hand, we've got the customer's willingness to buy, okay, with obviously top being highly willing to buy and the bottom being not wanting to buy at all. If you map a customer's willingness to buy to price, you end up with something like this. So in other words, if you actually, funnily enough, it's very difficult to give things away, okay, especially things that have value to them, because people think it's a con. But obviously, yeah, the cheaper your price, yeah, possibly the willingness to buy is higher. And it will get lower as your price goes down, and then you pass this point, which is the cost or effort to deliver and invest. So, that first line there is a critical line, because you really don't want to price any lower anywhere to the left than that. You want to actually be pricing to the right of that, so you can make some money. As you go on, you experiment with increasing price. Yeah, obviously the preponderance to buy might go down, but actually our experience is it's pretty price inelastic. In other words, it doesn't make a lot of difference until you get to a critical point, and there is a point normally where your customers are thinking to themselves, right, okay, this isn't bringing in enough value for me to warrant investing in this product or service. And it's that point where the line is, and I'll just get the arrow, the line is going down. Exactly, it's the price cliff. This is the point in which, so you really want to try and get your price as close as possible to that cliff. Okay, that's the ideal. And align your sales process to that as well. So everything that you're packaging up in terms of demonstrating and communicating value is aligned to that price. So this is, again, I go back to the psychology of a buyer. If I'm looking at how a buyer's thinking, this is sort of, they don't realize they're thinking like, but this is sort of what they're thinking. They're thinking, is it worth me spending the money on this product or service for the value that we're getting for it? If you can articulate the value really well, you can influence their own internal curve. So you can move that price cliff to the right by describing to them the benefit and the value that they're going to get. Of course, the danger is that when you're selling, you don't do that, and that price cliff is way over to the left, or in fact, there is no price cliff. They're really just not interested in buying it at all. But when we do pricing, this is the challenge that we're setting our clients to really think about. Okay, so in summary, just a few things that I thought I'd summarize, and we not talked about all these in great detail, but as a founder, I would be really, really focusing on the problem that I want to solve and the types of people for which I am the best solution to solve that problem. Build my value proposition and the framework of my value proposition around that. This is the fulcrum around which your business, orientates. Try and understand what your prospects perceive as being valuable, and how they how they calculate that. It's interesting that we've done a lot of work with recruitment and recruitment technology, not just that, but recruitment technology. And it's amazing how many software companies, for instance, have talked about things like quality of hire. Now, intuitively, you think quality of hire is really, really important for recruiters, internal recruiters in businesses or agencies. Funnily enough, that's not a value perspective for them. So what is the value perspective then in that case? And sometimes what you think is valuable to your buyers isn't actually valuable. It's pretty critical that you understand that. That allows you to look at this sort of product market fit alignment. And lastly, use value as the primary driver for price setting, not cost, not what your competitors are doing. It's interesting to know, but don't get sucked into a race to the bottom. But really understand value and use that as the primary driver for how you set your cost. Right. Thank you. I think that's it. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. As I said, it's just been a voice of reason and a very, very useful reminder for me as well on all of this stuff, because there is so much kind of science, if you like, that goes into this, and you have a huge amount of experience. So massively appreciate you taking your time out to share this with us. One quick question from me, and then I'll just see if there's any questions from anybody else before we close. What would you say is the value of having somebody like you, or somebody, I guess, that's been through these processes multiple times as part of your, I guess, virtual advisory board as a founder? Is it a nice to have, or is it is it something that you have seen save businesses essentially?
Of course, it's of incalculable value. For helping. Now, I think it's a good question, and look, yes, every founder, I'm sure every founder could benefit from that sort of virtual advisor network without a shadow of a doubt. Whether everybody feels that they need it or should have it, I think is a different question. And I think a lot of that depends on obviously the confidence and the experience of the founder, and also other people within their network that might be able to help them. And I think also to an extent the clarity of how clear are they what they're doing and what is the success that they're getting. Interestingly enough, and I appreciate our clients are normally 7-figure scale ups, but even there is a characteristic there. Not all 7-figure scale ups are our clients. We identified very quickly the bootstrapped companies with founders that have probably been going for more than 7 years were actually most likely, not so there aren't others, but they were the people that are most likely to benefit from our sort of more intense, let's put it that, more intense advisory services. But I'd put it this way: I would encourage everybody to open their eyes to the possibility of somebody or some people helping them. And there are people out there that will do that just because they want to do it, or or would like to get involved, or if there's equity on offer, a lot of people will help on that basis as well.
Those people who have, everybody loves being well, not everybody maybe, but being approached for their expertise, for their experience, for their and I think people who are sort of 5-10 years ahead of you, you're not their competition.
No.
And most people will have 20-30 minutes to help somebody who they see as being, they have once been in that position themselves. So don't be shy in terms of reaching out and kind of building that network and those people around you. And Howard has seen it from multiple different perspectives. So this is why this has been hopefully super valuable for all of you. Does anybody have any questions before we close for the day. Everyone's very quiet.
Stunned silence.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Hi, Howard. Thank you so much for today. So I actually own a recruitment company. So all of that was very relevant to me. And your first slide where you said we became founders because we want to help people, but we can't help everybody with everything. That definitely resonated. Like, I have had so many ideas that I've come up with, wanted to implement because I'm like, oh, I want to help this, I could help like this. And yeah, haven't been able to put them into play. I think part of my question is, what do you think you should do with all ideas if you think it's a good idea, but you don't necessarily have the time? Like, do you think put it out to someone else out there that could potentially help? And I think, like, the other question as well, I've had some ideas for recruitment platforms, tech, and then I've seen that similar things already exist in the market, but just maybe not in the region that I'm in, or, you know, I feel like I do it slightly better. What's your view on reaching out to companies that already exist and then saying, you know, can I launch your platform in a different market? Or do you think that that can then get a bit messy?
The first one, in terms of ideas, as a founder, you've had an idea, and that probably means you're sort of an ideas person. And which also means that if we stop having ideas, if we carry on doing things that don't allow us to utilize our ideas, we become bored. And actually that is quite a common reason why companies aren't successful, is because it's like a game of bagatelle. The ball's going all over the place. Nobody really knows the direction that the business is going in. And I'm not saying you've done this, but that's the day you sort of recognize this. That's the danger if you've got all of these ideas and they're all going on over the place. So my initial response, if you keep on having ideas, is sort of write them down and put them in the box, come back to them a few months later, think, is this still a good idea? And then if it is, and it's something that keeps on coming up, then there's no reason at all why you shouldn't look for other people that could take that idea and move forward with it. The challenge then is finding those people, I think, and finding the money and the investment in order to be able to do that. And the challenge there as well is that you're detracting yourself from your core recruitment business. And by the way, I must have worked with 3 or 4 recruitment businesses that have set up their own recruitment software. In fact, actually, I come to think probably more than that, because I don't think there's any founder of a recruitment software business that wasn't originally an owner of a recruitment agency or worked in a recruitment agency. So it's a well-trodden path.
The platform is looking at not a recruitment software, but recruitment tech, but like a freelance marketplace. And there's loads of them that exist now. But I remember having this idea years and years ago, and then discovered, oh, there's Juno. But I had the idea before now quite a few have popped up. And there's part of me that's like, oh, why didn't I just do this?
Why didn't you do it
8 years ago?
Yeah. Well, if you talk to the founders of Juno, you'd probably be glad that you didn't. But anyway, there are. But I think your idea, actually, I think your idea of saying, look, we've got a region here that I think that capability could be really useful, and you might have ready-made clients. Absolutely, there is a model to become the agent or the sort of the country conduit for this software. And actually, in some respects, it might be easier to use somebody else's software to do that than it is to create and develop that software. Because I mean, it sounds really simple, but actually, we've got to understand these, Helen will tell you from her time at Diversely, developing a piece of software so that it does just what it needs to from a minimum basis is difficult, and even more difficult now. So I'd say if you felt, Juno, there's others as well, I'd just approach them, or go for it and approach them. And if you want to know if there are any you're thinking of and you want to just let me know, because I do know some of the guys in these companies as well. I mean, you may also know them. But
do you know Cavalry that are now with And Friends?
Cavalry? No, I don't know.
Cavalry. Yeah, it was like a talent freelance marketplace. I became their APAC lead because I was based in Singapore and I was
Right.
meant to be launching it for them there. But the difficulty then was because Singapore wasn't their focus, anytime I had issues in Singapore, they go like, oh, we'll come to that. And then it
Oh,
just
that,
kind of
yeah,
flopped. So I almost want to
yeah.
be able to launch it somewhere, but it's like mine. But
You
anyway,
want it to be yours.
yeah, that's a
Yeah.
bigger thing. But it's just, yeah, wanting to help everyone, but then not having the time
Not
to do
having,
everything.
it is really challenging, and especially when you're running a business like recruitment, which is full on the accelerator the whole time. I mean, you can't
Yeah.
take your eye off it. So yeah,
Yeah.
understood.
Cool. Thank you, Howard.
Fantastic. No, thanks, Nikki.
Question from Jazz.
Thank you, Howard. Very colloquial Radio 4 voice, lovely in my ears. I'm loving that.
It is, isn't it? It
It's
is. You're
beautiful,
right.
especially with the extra bass on. Quick question. My pricing model varies depending on who I'm talking to, depending on how deep their pockets are and how long their arms are. But I always offer the value structure and the experience. They're the two things that I interlock pretty hard on. So is it sustainable to, because eventually when my business is successful and people actually do talk, because I do work in a small paddock in the world, and they go, wait a minute, I paid a lot more than that. Could that be a future time bomb that I'm setting up for myself? So I work in the charity space, the corporate space, and the social value space. So some of the work I do is absolutely for free. So I work on a buy one, give one basis. I do overcharge. And I tell people I overcharge them to their face. And I then explain why I'm overcharging them, because they buy a product and service off me, but it allows me to give something back to the world that I want to work in, and they can white label it as their company.
That's a good question around pricing. I'm not a great lover of differentiating pricing too much between different clients, exactly for the reason that you said, which is, and especially if you're focusing on a particular market where your buyers are talking to each other, which, by the way, you should be trying to do that, because that's an easy way of getting business. As soon as you're dominant in the market, then people are coming to you rather than the other way around. But if you do, I mean, if you've got something explicit which everybody understands, and they understand that some people are getting it for nothing, some people are paying over the odds, that's fine. It just so happens they've got the money, they're paying over the odds. They don't, they're getting it for free. I think that's fine. I think the problem I see is when companies are going in and offering basically unsubstantiated discounts, because somebody just so happens to be a really hard negotiator. If that does happen and there is a differential in pricing, then that should really go hand in hand with something commercially that they're giving back for that discount, like a longer contract or lower capability, lower quality of service, something like that. But it is difficult if you've got a whole portfolio of clients all buying the same thing, all at different prices, and one of them talks to the other. Suddenly they will come back to you and say, well, why did they get it at 50% of what I paid for it? So I think understanding your pricing structure and having it relatively formalized, I think, is not a bad thing, and trying to stick to that.
I will then meet the Jordan. Yeah, they'll then meet the Jordan Belfort in me. They want to challenge it.
I thought you were going to say the Donald Trump, actually, but yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I would tend to agree there as well. It can be extremely awkward, particularly when you're serving, as you say, Howard, a particular market, when those conversations crop up, particularly when you are at an event or in a space where all of your potential clients are hanging out together and you're there as well. You kind of want to avoid those awkward conversations as much as possible. And I think it comes down to integrity, doesn't it? But I did love your point about meeting people halfway. If you are going to give those types of discounts, or if they're going to ask for those types of discounts, then there needs to be a compromise on their side as well. It can't be all you crossing the line over to their side. It's got to be a bit of halfway. So there's always a way of doing it. And I would say that those extended contracts are a really good way of getting that across the line. because it helps you massively, you know, year 1, year 2, year 3, whatever it is, because you know you've got that. I mean, that was an absolute lifesaver for diversity on a number of occasions. So yeah, some really good tactics there. Thank you. We're going to leave it there because we are a little bit over time. But Howard is probably won't thank me for saying this, but in the platform. So if you do want to ask him any questions, you can always send him a little DM, and you never know, he might reply when he has time. But thank you so much, Howard, for all of your wisdom and insights, and just huge depth of experience that I would never have had access to had I not gone through the accelerator, and these guys wouldn't have access to had they not joined this platform. So thank you, and thank you everyone for listening patiently and for your questions. And
thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Helen, as well.
Bye.
Bye.